His Excellency Mr. Edward Natape Nipaki, Prime Minister of Vanuatu. Your Excellency, Mr. Edward Natape Nipaki, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Allow me to begin by extending to you mine and my delegation's most profound gratitude and deep appreciation for the excellent arrangements accorded to us since our arrival in this beautiful city of Copenhagen, and for the arrangement put in place to facilitate this very important COP15 conference. Madam President, the road 2 years ago from Bali has led thousands of the world's citizens from different backgrounds, nationalities, and creed to converge here in this beautiful city of Copenhagen with one common objective: to forge and agree on a global climate agreement that will steer the world away from a path of self-destruction. The lives of so many of the world's most vulnerable hinges on the decisions we as global leaders will make at this critical hour. Madam President, we are extremely disappointed that some parties have opted for alternative arrangements outside Kyoto legal framework as a strategy to take softer emission reduction commitments and abandon compliance requirements. We strongly urge those parties to exercise greater responsibility in supporting the global momentum to ensure we leave Copenhagen with an ambitious outcome that will bring hope to all global citizens. In this regard, I strongly implore upon all parties to constructively embrace an agreement that commits us, the current custodians of this world, with the goal to limit long-term temperature increases to well below 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrialist levels and stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations at well below 350 parts per million. For this long-term ambitious goal to be realized, we must commit to a mitigation target for global greenhouse emissions to peak by 2015, long-term global emissions to be reduced by more than 85% below 1990 levels by 2050, and Annex 1 parties to the UNFCCC to reduce emissions by more than 45% below 1990 levels by 2020 and more than 95% of 1990 levels by 2050. In the spirit of common but differentiated responsibilities, we urge the larger developing countries, parties to deviate from business as usual greenhouse gas emissions through nationally appropriate mitigation actions. Those long-term goals and mitigation targets are in line with the most recent climate change science. They are technically feasible and economically affordable. Madam President, new additional stable and predictable adaptation financing that is over and above current development aid is urgently needed to enhance action on adaptation, with priority given to urgent and immediate needs of small island developing states, in particular the LDCs. The LDC Fund is a classical example of unpredictable adaptation financing that is hindering the achievement of appropriate climate change resilience to LDCs. Immediate replenishment of the LDC Fund, therefore, is critical for the implementation of urgent, immediate, and emerging adaptation priorities of the selected 49 least developed countries. For many small island countries, retreat or relocation will be the only adaptation option available in the near future. Risk and insurance mechanisms to cover loss and damage in this regard is therefore of critical adaptation importance to us. Transfer of environmentally appropriate technology for the implementation of the adaptation action and capacity building in the areas identified by the Bali Action Plan are critical and of equal importance in building resilience to the impacts of climate change. Madam President, at the national level, my country has already begun implementation of adaptation action to combat the adverse impacts of climate change. We have completed 3 adaptation projects, including 1 relocation initiative through the support of UNFCCC and our bilateral and multilateral partners. We have established a national institutional framework for the implementation of the UNFCCC, and we have developed adaptation experience and expertise at the national and regional level. However, we fully recognize that we cannot meet the full cost of adapting to climate change on our own. We will continue to seek support from the UNFCCC processes, from our bilateral and multilateral partners, and from regional institutions to meet our adaptation needs. The urgency to seal a fair deal here in Copenhagen is therefore paramount. Madam President, the survival of small island state depends entirely on the achievement of an ambitious agreement that has the support and the commitment of the developed and developing world. We note the emission reduction pledges from the industrialized world of late. However, we are calling for more ambitious targets consistent with what the climate change science is telling us. A 2°C increase compared to pre-industrial levels would have devastating consequences on small island states due to resulting sea level rise, coral bleaching, coastal erosion, changing precipitation patterns, increased incidence and re-emergence of climate-related diseases, and the impacts of increasing frequent and severe weather events. As I speak, our brothers and sisters in Fiji are recovering from a Category 2 cyclone that ripped through the country 3 days ago, causing widespread flooding and forcing over 4,000 people to emergency shelters. This is but a foretaste of what could become much worse in the absence of an ambitious climate agreement. Therefore, in conclusion, Madam President, let me again impress upon us all the urgent need for an ambitious global climate agreement to address climate change. I call upon the leaders of all parties to reach a fair, ambitious, and legally binding agreement. We have all traveled thousands of miles to get to this great and welcoming city of Copenhagen with the hope of sealing the deal. How befitting it would be if we could live with an all-conquering agreement that will truly transform Copenhagen to Hopenhagen. We came to cope and must live with hope. The whole of humanity is counting on our leadership and political will to make this happen. We stand ready as a small island developing state to do our part. I challenge and invite the rest of the international community in unison to do the same with the small island states at this 11th hour. I thank you, Madam President.